हेलो फ्रेंड्स, वेलकम टू माय चैनल। ये है कुछ बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट नोट्स जो आप लोगों को चाहिए। यू नीड दिस notes, so take some screenshots, and this is an important image from the before topic I taught you, the outbreak of the revolution. You need to mark this and take some screenshots if it is not mentioned in your book. It is very important to know about the whole overview idea about the emancipation.
There was a reign of terror. The period from 1793 to 1794 is referred to as the Reign of Terror. Robespierre was the monarch, or there was a government of Robespierre during that time of France. His policies were severe control and punishment. All those who were the enemies of republic, and mostly his victims were ex-nobles and clergies. He gave them severe punishment, like guillotine. Guillotine. What is the meaning of guillotine? Guillotine is a device consisting of two poles and a blade with which a person is beheaded. It was a name after Dr. Guillotine, who invented it. It was invented by Dr. Guillotine. Robespierre government issued laws that increase wages and prices to the maximum. Meat and bread were rationed. Peasants were forced to transport their grain to cities and sell it at a price fixed by the government. The government of Robespierre fixed the prices of the grains, and he forced the peasants to sell it in the city market. The use of more expensive white flour was forbidden. There was a cancellation of the use of expensive white flour, and all citizens were required to eat the pain d'égalité, meaning equality bread. So as the staple food of India is rice, samely the staple food of France during that reign was bread. So it means the equality bread means equal food, and the equality bread was a loaf made of whole wheat. Equality was sought to be practiced throughout forms of speech and address, and equality was not only in the case of food but also in the case of their forms of speech and address. Everyone's speech and address were practiced, that everyone should have equal speech and address. No one will be judged by their level or by their work. Everyone will be having same food, means same equality bread, and also their speech and forms of address and speech will be also same. And also there during that time was traditionally people were called monsieur, meaning sir, and madam means madam. All French and women were called during that time monsieur, sir, and madam. Means during that time the small estate peoples or the small class people called the big class people as monsieur, sir, and madam means madam. So it was cancelled and everyone called each other as citoyen and citoyenne means citizens. So everyone was a citizen of France, so everyone was called citoyen and citoyenne. Citoyen is the male form of citizen and citoyenne is the female form of citizen, means as a whole everyone was called by each other citizens, which is a very good thing that he brought front, but most of his policies were very much abusive. He shutted down all kind of churches, and their buildings were converted into barracks or offices. The buildings of churches were converted into barracks or offices. Robespierre pursued his policies so relentlessly that even his supporters began to demand for moderation. Their supporters were demanding for moderation because his policies were so much severe and punishable who were against the republic, and his policies were very much abusive. So even his supporters was asking that there should be a moderation, there should be a mediocre or modern kind of punishment. Not only the death or the guillotining is not the result of punishment. This kind of punishment should be cancelled, and there should be a moderation in the government and in the punishment also. So finally, as he not accepted this kind of things, and he followed the things what he was doing by his own policies he put forward, which was very much abusive and against the humanity. So finally he was convicted by a court in 1794 July. So in July 1794 he was convicted in a court and arrested, and on the next day sent to the guillotine, and he was also guillotined the next day. So there was also a directory rule in France during that time. The fall of the Jacobin government, when the Jacobin government fallen down, it allowed wealthier middle classes to seize power. All the powers were in the hand of the middle class, and the middle class took the powers in their hand again. A new constitution was introduced which denied the vote to non-property. The people who do not have any kind of property in France, they were denied of voting. They were denied of their vote rights. Their vote rights were denied who do not have any kind of property. And then appointed a directory and executive made up of 5 members. The directory, they appointed an executive made up of 5 members. This was meant as safeguard against the concentration of power in a one-man executive as under the Jacobins. However, the directors often clashed the legislative councils, who then sought to dismiss them. So ultimately the directors clashed with the legislative council, so they thought of dismissing the legislative councils. The political instability of the directory, there was a political instability in the directory, so it paved the way for the rise of military dictator Napoleon Bonaparte. So it led, ultimately the political instability led to the rise of a military directory or dictator of Napoleon Bonaparte. So ultimately there was a military dictator in the form of Napoleon Bonaparte in France, as there were political instability in directory. Through all these changes in the form of government, the ideals freedom and equality were spreading. Everyone was accepting these changes which is brought in the constitution, in the directory, and then the dictator Napoleon Bonaparte, there was a military dictator which was Napoleon Bonaparte. All this kind of changes in the government encouraged people to follow the road of freedom, of equality, and they started protesting, and ultimately they started protesting, motivated political movements in France and the rest of the Europe during the following century. So all these changes led to a protest in France and all the rest Europe during the following centuries. These all kind of things happened. The abolition of slavery. The next topic is the abolition of the slavery. How the slavery system was abolished. One of the most revolutionary social reforms of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery. During the Jacobin regime, there was abolition of slavery in French colonies. The colonies in the Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo were important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. But as the Europeans were going out for the work of this kind of things, so that for that there was a slavery system, a triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americans. The slave trade began in the 17th century. You need to remember that the slave trade started in the 17th century. French merchants sailed from the ports of Bordeaux or Nantes to the African coast, where they bought slaves from local chieftains. branded and shackled. They were branded and shackled. The slaves were packed tightly. The slaves who were brought from the Africas and from the Bordeaux or Nance to the African coast, they were packed tightly into the ships for the 3-month long voyage across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. They were took to the Caribbean for work, as the Europeans were going out for some kind of working for gaining more money. So the Africans and the people from the slaves from the Bordeaux and Nance to the African coast, they were brought to work for the Caribbean. Then they were sold to the plantation owners. The exploitation of slave labor made it possible to meet the growing demand in the European markets for sugar, coffee, and indigo. Port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owed their economic prosperity to the flourishing slave trade. So these all kinds of reasons together was the main form to increase the prosperity or flourishing of the slave trade. So throughout the 18th century, there was little criticism of slavery in France. There was little criticism. Some people criticized the slave trade, that why this kind of things are happening, why they are denied of their rights, their rights, why they are denied some kind of rights the constitution have given them, why they are being treated against the humanity. So some criticism was there, but in small amount, not in a vast amount. The National Assembly held long debates about whether the rights of the man should be extended to all French subjects, including those in the colonies. That how they can give, or should the rights of the men that are exploiting by the slave trade can be freed, and this abolished, can be the slave trade abolished. So this kind of many kind of discussions were going on in the National Assembly. The National Assembly was that who just formed on 20 June after the king Louis XVI. The National Assembly was formed after the king Louis XVI. He refused to accept the demand of the third estate on 20 June in the Inner Tennis Code 789. So this was the National Assembly, which we are reading further. So there was a convention which in 1794 legislated to free all slaves. All slaves were freed in the French overseas possessions. So there was abolition of slave. This, however, turned out to be short 10-term measures 10 years later. So for 10 years only this slave trade or the abolition of slavery was being done. But after that, again, when there was Napoleon reintroduced, when he became the monarch, he reintroduced the slavery, and the plantation owners understood their freedom as including the right to enclave African Negroes in pursuit of their economic interests. Slavery was finally abolished. So till after 10 years, again this started by it was reintroduced by Napoleon with some restrictions, and finally the abolition of slave trade was in, or the slavery system was in 1848 in the French colonies. So as further we have known about the reign of terror, then we have learned about a dictatorial rule in France and the abolition of slavery. So these are the things we have learned today. So a overview you can take by reading the book easily. So for today only this much. There will be a last part. After this video there will be a fourth part. So thanks for watching.